Tonight, let your breathing slow. Let the modern world soften at the edges, the quiet hum of your room becoming distant, almost indistinct. There is no rush here, no urgency, only a slow and steady journey backward in time. We are traveling to medieval West Africa, to the vast lands of the Mali Empire, where the Niger River bends in long, patient curves and the sun rises heavy and golden over wide savanna plains. This was a world of immense wealth and quiet endurance. Beneath layers of red earth lay gold, soft, luminous, and powerful enough to shift economies across continents. But before gold became coins in distant markets or ornaments in royal courts, it was dust. It was labor. It was heat pressing down on human backs. Tonight, you will imagine yourself not as a king or a merchant, but as one of the countless ordinary workers whose hands sifted the riverbanks and dug into the earth. You will feel the rhythm of work, the weight of the sun, the stillness of the horizon. From there, we will gradually rise, through empire, scholarship, trade, hierarchy, and finally into the measured elegance of a royal court. But first, we begin where wealth begins. With you, in the earth. Imagine waking before sunrise. The air is already warm, thick with the scent of dry grass and distant water. The horizon glows faintly pink, and for a brief moment before the sun climbs, there is a softness to the world. This will not last. You sleep in a modest village of mud brick structures with thatched roofs, clustered near a tributary of the Niger River. The walls are cool at night, but by midday they will radiate heat. You rise quietly, stretching muscles that are rarely fully rested. There is no dramatic beginning to your day, no sudden command, only routine. You step outside, bare feet pressing into packed earth. A clay bowl of millet porridge waits, plain, filling, sufficient. Food is not indulgence. It is preparation, because the day ahead is long. Gold mining in medieval West Africa was rarely the deep tunnel work later associated with industrial mines. Instead, much of it was alluvial, gold dust and small nuggets carried by rivers and trapped in sediment. This means hours of bending, scooping, lifting, sifting. You walk toward the riverbank with other workers, carrying a shallow wooden pan. The sun has begun to rise now, and already the light feels heavier. At the water's edge you kneel. The river is calm, deceptively gentle. You push your hands into wet sand, feeling its coolness before lifting it into the pan. The motion repeats. Sand, water, swirl. Sand, water, swirl. Again and again. The heavier particles settle. Most of what remains is nothing, just grit and fragments. Occasionally, rarely, you might see it. A faint glimmer at the bottom of the pan. A speck, barely visible unless the light strikes at just the right angle. This is what your entire day depends on. You lean forward for hours, your lower back tightening slowly, almost politely at first. The sun climbs higher. There is no shade here unless you create it, and shade means lost time. Sweat gathers along your neck and runs down your spine. It stings your eyes. The river mud coats your hands, drying into fine cracks across your skin. There is no dramatic suffering, no theatrical collapse, just repetition, the rhythm of survival. And you begin to understand something. This work is not about strength alone. It is about endurance, about tolerating monotony, about accepting that most efforts yield nothing visible at all. By midday, the heat becomes a presence. It presses against your shoulders. The air shimmers. Even the insects seem slower. Water must be rationed carefully. Too much and supplies run thin. Too little and dizziness sets in. You learn to pace yourself, to move deliberately, conserving energy the way others might conserve coins. And yet, you do not own what you find. Gold in the Mali Empire was controlled carefully by rulers. Large nuggets were often reserved for the Mansa, the emperor, while dust circulated through trade networks. If you uncover something substantial, it does not become your wealth. It becomes the empire's. Your reward is survival, stability, protection under imperial authority. The social structure is clear. You are part of a system that stretches far beyond this riverbank. Caravans will carry this gold north across the Sahara. It will cross into North Africa, into Europe, into lands you will never see. Coins will be minted. Markets will flourish. But here, on your knees in the mud, Empire feels distant. What you feel is the ache in your shoulders. Occasionally, mining moves away from rivers and into shallow pits dug into dry earth. These are narrow excavations, reinforced with timber when possible. The air inside them is still and heavy. You crouch low, chipping at soil with simple tools, filling baskets that are hauled upward by rope. The earth does not give up its brightness easily. Dust clings to your lungs. Light filters in from above, thin and pale. Conversation is minimal, not from secrecy but from conservation. Words require energy. Above ground, life continues in measured rhythms. Women grind grain. Children fetch water. Elders sit in shaded areas, watching the horizon. The village depends on your labor just as you depend on its protection and shared resources. Gold mining regions such as Bambuk and Bure became legendary for their productivity. But legends simplify. They do not describe blistered palms or the way heat radiates from red soil in late afternoon. They do not describe the quiet mental strain of searching for something that may or may not appear. As evening approaches, the sun softens. The sky deepens into orange and violet. Work slows, not because it is finished but because bodies have limits. You carry your findings to be weighed and recorded. The process is orderly, structured. Authority is present even if distant. You return home tired in a way that settles into your bones. There is satisfaction perhaps in having endured, but tomorrow will be the same. The rhythm of their lives, the rhythm of your life, moves with the river and the sun. It is steady, demanding, uncelebrated, and this is why you might not last a single day. Not because of dramatic danger, but because of repetition, because of heat, because of knowing that the glitter in your pan will illuminate palaces you will never enter. And yet, without you, those palaces would not shine. Let that thought linger gently. In our next segment, we will rise from the riverbanks to meet the man whose name became synonymous with unimaginable wealth, Mansa Musa, whose pilgrimage would send ripples across continents. I'm ready for the next part when you are. As the sun sets on the riverbank and the quiet rhythm of mining fades into evening stillness, we gradually lift our gaze. Beyond the villages, beyond the gold fields, beyond the bend of the Niger River. There, seated within the structures of imperial authority, is a man whose name would echo far beyond West Africa. Mansa Musa. His story does not begin with spectacle. It begins with inheritance, responsibility, and patience. Mansa Musa came to power in the early 14th century, around 1312, during the height of the Mali Empire. The title Mansa simply means king or ruler, but in his case it signified authority over vast territories, stretching from the Atlantic coast deep into the interior, encompassing gold fields, trade hubs, and agricultural lands. You might imagine a dramatic coronation, but governance in Mali was structured and measured. Power flowed through lineage, alliances, and the careful management of wealth. Musa inherited not only land but also systems, trade networks, provincial administrators, tribute arrangements. He ruled from the heartland along the Niger River, where cities like Niani and Timbuktu were growing in importance. Unlike the miner in the previous segment, Musa did not feel the river mud between his fingers, but he understood its value. Gold, after all, was the foundation of imperial strength, and Musa governed during a time when global demand for gold was immense. North African states, Mediterranean traders, and even European markets relied on West African supplies. Gold flowed north across the Sahara in caravans, exchanged for salt, textiles, horses, and scholarly texts. Musa's power rested on managing that flow. He expanded and consolidated territory, ensuring trade routes remained secure. Under his leadership, the empire maintained relative stability. Provincial governors were appointed to oversee distant regions, and tribute systems ensured loyalty. But Musa's name is most often remembered for a single journey. In 1324, he embarked on the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, a religious duty for Muslims who are able to undertake it. This was not merely a spiritual voyage. It was a procession that would quietly reshape perceptions of Africa across the Islamic world and beyond. Imagine the caravan. Hundreds of attendants, officials, servants, scholars, armed guards, camels laden with provisions, and among them, camels carrying gold, large quantities of it. Contemporary accounts suggest that Musa distributed gold generously along the way, giving alms in cities such as Cairo. His generosity was so substantial that, for a time, it disrupted local gold markets, lowering its value through sheer abundance. There is something almost serene in that image, a ruler traveling steadily across desert sands, not in conquest but in pilgrimage. The Sahara is vast. The journey would have taken months, sand shifting beneath hooves, heat rising in quiet waves, nights under brilliant stars. Musa's pilgrimage was not hurried. It moved at the pace of camels and weather. And as he traveled, word spread. West Africa was no longer a distant abstraction on maps. It became a source of wealth so significant that cartographers in Europe began marking the region with golden crowns and inscriptions. The Catalan Atlas of 1375 famously depicts Musa seated on a throne, holding a golden orb. But beyond wealth, Musa's journey carried intellectual consequence. During his pilgrimage, he encountered scholars, architects, and jurists. He recruited learned men to return with him to Mali, fostering Islamic scholarship and architectural development in cities like Timbuktu and Gao. Under his reign, mosques were constructed or expanded. Madrasas were supported. Libraries began to grow. Gold then was transformed. It became buildings. It became manuscripts. It became education. And yet, Musa's rule was not simply generosity and pilgrimage. Governance required firmness. Expansion required military presence. Authority required enforcement. The Mali Empire under Musa continued consolidating territories, including the city of Timbuktu, which had been contested in earlier decades. Trade routes were guarded. Tribute was collected. But unlike rulers who are remembered solely for conquest, Musa is often remembered for patronage. His reign represented a kind of equilibrium, wealth flowing outward, knowledge flowing inward. Imagine him seated within a shaded courtyard, advisors nearby, courtiers attentive, discussions unfolding not in haste but in deliberation. The empire's rhythm mirrored the river's, steady, expansive, controlled. And yet, Musa's legacy is also layered with myth. Later storytellers would exaggerate numbers, thousands of camels, unimaginable quantities of gold. The truth is difficult to measure precisely, but exaggeration itself tells us something. It tells us how deeply his wealth impressed those who encountered him. For the miner in segment 1, gold was dust. For Mansa Musa, it was diplomacy. It was devotion. It was legacy. As his caravan returned from Mecca, it carried not only goods but ideas. The Mali Empire became more firmly integrated into the broader Islamic world. Trade networks strengthened. Scholarship flourished. But empires are not static. Their strength invites attention. Their wealth invites ambition. And as Mali expanded, it would face new challenges, political shifts, contested territories, the strain of managing vast lands. In our next segment, we will move from the steady reign of Musa to the broader expansion of the Mali Empire itself, how trade routes were secured, how borders were extended, and how wealth beneath the sand translated into imperial power across the savannah. As Mansa Musa's caravan fades into the horizon, and the quiet echo of camel bells dissolves into desert wind, we widen our perspective. Because an empire is not only a ruler, it is roads, it is a river. It is an agreement whispered in shaded courtyards and enforced along distant frontiers. The Mali Empire did not rise suddenly. It grew gradually like a river swelling after seasonal rains. Long before Mansa Musa's reign, earlier leaders, most famously Sundiata Keita in the 13th century, had begun consolidating Mande territories. What Musa inherited was not a fragile kingdom, but a structured and expanding political system. Yet expansion required patience. Imagine the geography. To the north, the vast Sahara, shimmering and unforgiving. To the south, forested regions rich with resources. To the east and west, trade corridors threading across savanna grasslands. Control meant access to gold fields, to agricultural communities, to caravan routes that stitched West Africa to North Africa and beyond. Unlike empires built on relentless marching armies, Mali expanded through layered strategies. Some regions were incorporated through alliance and tribute. Local leaders retained authority in exchange for loyalty and taxation. Others required military presence, quiet demonstrations of force to discourage rebellion. But even military campaigns in this era unfolded differently than modern warfare. Armies moved slowly. Logistics mattered. Supply lines depended on pack animals, river transport, and seasonal timing. Battles, when they occurred, were decisive but rarely prolonged spectacles. The greater challenge was holding territory, ensuring that governors administered fairly, that tribute arrived on time, that trade continued uninterrupted. The Niger River became the empire's central artery. Picture its broad curve, glinting in the sun. Canoes moving goods downstream. Fishing communities along its banks. Fertile floodplains supporting millet and sorghum cultivation. Whoever controlled the river controlled movement. And Mali did. Timbuktu, originally a seasonal Tuareg settlement, gradually became integrated into imperial structure. Gao, farther east, shifted under Malian authority for periods of time. Walata, on the southern edge of the Sahara, functioned as a crucial trading hub linking desert caravans to river systems. Expansion was not only territorial, it was economic. Caravan routes were secured with patrols and agreements. Taxes were collected at strategic points. Merchants, whether Berber, Arab, or Mande, operated within imperial oversight. Salt traveled south, gold traveled north, and with each exchange, the empire's influence deepened. But expansion carried tension. Distant provinces could feel remote from the imperial center at Niani. Communication moved at the pace of travelers. A message might take weeks to cross the empire. Governors needed autonomy, but too much autonomy risked fragmentation. Imagine a provincial administrator in Gao, seated beneath a wooden canopy, weighing decisions. How strictly should taxes be enforced? How much tribute must be sent upriver? How firmly should local dissent be suppressed? Authority in such spaces was not loud. It was persistent. Over time, the empire's reach stretched from the Atlantic coast inland toward the Niger Bend and beyond. Its population encompassed diverse ethnic groups, languages, and traditions. And this diversity required accommodation. Islam played a unifying role among elite circles and urban centers, especially along trade routes. Yet many rural communities maintained older spiritual practices. Imperial policy often allowed coexistence, so long as loyalty and tribute remained intact. In this way, Mali expanded not by erasing local identity, but by layering imperial oversight above it. But no expansion is without strain. As territories widened, so did administrative complexity. Elite families vied for influence. Succession disputes occasionally unsettled stability. Border regions required vigilance against rivals, including emerging powers such as the Songhai. Still, during the height of Musa's reign, expansion felt measured and sustainable. Caravans crossed the Sahara with relative security. Markets in Timbuktu hummed with quiet bargaining. Rivers carried goods beneath wide skies. And beneath it all, always, the gold fields continued their silent work. Imagine again the miner from Segment 1, sifting river sediment under relentless sun. He may never have seen Niani's court. He may never have heard of Cairo's gold markets. Yet his labor connected invisibly to imperial expansion. Each grain contributed to tribute. Each tribute strengthened authority. Each strengthened authority extended borders. Empires, after all, are constructed from small, repetitive acts. A shovel lifting earth. A ledger recording tax. A caravan crossing sand. The Mali Empire's expansion was not explosive. It was cumulative. And yet, like all great states, its strength would eventually invite both admiration and challenge. In our next segment, we turn not to power or territory but to knowledge. To manuscripts. To libraries hidden beneath desert dust. To Timbuktu where ink, not gold, became the treasure. As the empire expands in territory and influence, something quieter begins to flourish. Not in mines. Not along caravan routes. But inside cool mud brick rooms, where light filters gently through wooden shutters. We now travel to Timbuktu, the city whose name would one day drift into European imagination as a synonym for distance and mystery, but which in its time was something far more grounded and remarkable. Picture the city at the height of Mali's influence. Low earthen buildings rise from the sand, their surfaces smoothed by hand. Wooden beams protrude from mosque walls, both decorative and structural. The air is dry, the sky vast. Traders speak in measured tones. Students carry bundles of papers wrapped carefully in cloth. Because Timbuktu was not only a trading hub, it was a center of learning. At the heart of this intellectual world stood institutions like the Sankor Mosque, which functioned not merely as a place of prayer but as a university-like center of study. Scholars gathered to teach jurisprudence, astronomy, grammar, mathematics, theology, and poetry. And they wrote. They wrote on paper imported across the Sahara. They wrote with ink carefully prepared. They copied texts by hand, line after steady line. The manuscripts of Timbuktu were not singular royal decrees or decorative showpieces. They were working texts, commentaries, legal opinions, scientific observations, medical guides, contracts, letters, family records. Imagine sitting in a shaded courtyard. A teacher recites softly. Students respond. The scratching of reed pens moves rhythmically across paper. Dust swirls lightly beyond the walls, but inside the atmosphere is deliberate and focused. Knowledge here was not abstract luxury. It was infrastructure. Islamic scholarship connected Timbuktu to broader intellectual networks stretching across North Africa and into the Middle East. Scholars corresponded with Cairo and Fez. Books traveled along the same routes as salt and gold. Yet the manuscripts also reflect local realities. Legal rulings address disputes between merchants. Contracts document trade arrangements. Agricultural treatises describe planting cycles suited to West African climates. Poetry praises both God and homeland. This was not borrowed culture. It was adapted, integrated, lived. Over centuries, families carefully preserved these manuscripts in private libraries. They wrapped them in leather, stored them in wooden chests, passed them down through generations. And then, as political power shifted, from Mali to Songhai, and later through Moroccan invasion and regional fragmentation, Timbuktu's prominence waned. Caravan routes changed. Imperial stability weakened. European colonial expansion altered trade patterns entirely. Gradually, the city's global reputation dimmed. But the manuscripts remained, hidden in homes, buried in trunks, protected quietly by families who understood their value. For centuries, outsiders underestimated this written tradition. West Africa was often wrongly portrayed as primarily oral, as though scholarship had never taken root there. Yet the manuscripts contradicted that assumption. When researchers and historians began documenting these collections in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, they uncovered tens of thousands of texts, some dating back to the 13th and 14th centuries. Legal debates, astronomical charts, discussions of ethics, even records of everyday commerce. During times of instability, including recent conflicts in Mali, local residents risked their safety to smuggle manuscripts out of harm's way, transporting them quietly to safer locations. Imagine that scene. Night. Sand underfoot. A family carrying bundles of fragile papers wrapped in cloth, moving carefully through shadowed streets. Not gold, not jewels, but words, preserving ink from fire, protecting memory from erasure. There is something deeply calming in this idea, that knowledge copied slowly by hand centuries ago can endure through political upheaval, through climate, through misunderstanding. The manuscripts of Timbuktu remind us that empires are not measured solely in territory or wealth. They are measured in thought, in questions asked, in ideas preserved. And as we linger here, among shelves of carefully stacked papers, among quiet scholarly debates, we see another side of Mali's power. Not only gold beneath sand, but learning above it. And from this world of scholarship and preservation, we move gently toward the beliefs that shape daily life. Because beyond manuscripts and mosques, ordinary people navigated a layered spiritual landscape, where Islamic teachings and indigenous traditions met, blended, and coexisted. Let us now step into that world of ritual and belief. Step now away from the manuscripts stacked in careful rows and return to the wider landscape. Beyond the scholarly courtyards of Timbuktu, beyond the caravan routes and royal compounds, ordinary life continued in villages scattered across savannah and riverbank. And in these villages, belief was not confined to parchment. It lived in rhythm. It lived in gesture. It lived in the quiet space between sunrise and work. By the height of the Mali Empire, Islam had become deeply rooted in urban centers and among ruling elites. Mosques stood in cities like Timbuktu, Gao, and Niani. Friday prayers gathered merchants, judges, scholars, and officials. Quranic recitation echoed softly beneath earthen domes. Yet for many rural communities, belief was layered rather than replaced. Imagine yourself in a small riverside settlement at dawn. The air is cool for a brief moment before heat begins its steady ascent. Roosters call. Smoke curls from cooking fires. Somewhere nearby, a voice recites verses in Arabic, measured and melodic. But just beyond the village boundary, a sacred grove stands. Tall trees rise close together, their trunks wrapped occasionally in cloth offerings. The grove predates Islam. It is older than imperial borders. It is where ancestors are remembered, where spirits are acknowledged, where certain trees are never cut. In this world, Islam did not always erase older cosmologies. It often settled beside them. You might see a village imam teaching children to recite verses from wooden tablets, the ink washed away and rewritten each day as part of learning. And later, you might see those same children accompany elders to a riverbank where offerings of millet are cast into water to honor unseen forces. This blending was not contradiction. It was adaptation. Islamic law governed trade, inheritance, and scholarship in cities. Indigenous spiritual frameworks shaped relationships to land, ancestors, and community. Amulets, small leather pouches containing Quranic verses, hung around necks for protection. But protection also came from ancestral blessings, from carefully observed rituals marking planting and harvest. Imagine the rhythm of a seasonal festival. Drums pulse steadily. Women move in coordinated steps. Elders watch from woven mats. A storyteller recites lineage history stretching back generations. Overhead, the sky darkens slowly into indigo. Religion here is not abstract theology. It is embedded in agriculture, in weather, in birth and death. Islamic scholars debated legal nuance. Villagers watched the behavior of birds before planting. Both systems aimed to interpret a world that could be generous one season and unforgiving the next. And above all, belief offered structure. It explained drought. It explained abundance. It explained why gold might lie hidden beneath soil while hunger still visited villages. For rulers like Mansa Musa, Islam connected Mali to a global community stretching from North Africa to Arabia. For farmers and miners, spiritual life was intimate and local, tied to family and field. There is something gentle in this coexistence. A mosque rising from packed earth. A sacred tree standing nearby. Call to prayer carried on warm wind. Drumbeats answering at dusk. And as belief shaped how people understood their world, it also shaped how they organized their labor, their trade, and their obligations. Faith and economy were not separate spheres. Trade caravans relied on shared religious networks for trust. Legal contracts drew upon Islamic jurisprudence. Seasonal rituals structured planting cycles. So now, as evening settles over the Niger River and lantern light flickers inside village homes, we turn toward the systems that moved wealth across vast distances. Because gold did not remain in the ground. It traveled. And to understand how Mali became known across continents, we must follow the caravans north, into the long silence of the Sahara. Let us step into the steady rhythm of trans-Saharan trade. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of the Sahara. Before you stretches not a shifting chaos of dunes, but a vast, breathing stillness. The sand rolls outward in pale waves. The sky above is enormous, almost white with heat. There is very little sound, only wind moving lightly across the surface of the earth. And yet, across this apparent emptiness, entire economies moved. Gold did not remain in West African riverbeds. It traveled north. Salt did not remain in desert mines. It traveled south. Between them flowed caravans, long, deliberate lines of camels carrying the weight of empires on their backs. You would not last long here without preparation. The desert does not shout. It simply endures. Caravans were carefully organized. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of camels moved together under the guidance of experienced desert navigators. These guides memorized stars, wind patterns, and subtle variations in terrain. There were no signposts. Only knowledge passed down through repetition and trust. Imagine the slow rhythm of a caravan in motion. Camel hooves press into sand. Leather water skins sway. Bells tied loosely around animals' necks produce a soft, irregular chime. The air is dry enough to crack lips within hours. Travel happened at measured pace. Too fast and animals weakened. Too slow and provisions ran thin. Salt slabs were carved from desert mines like those at Tagaza. Massive rectangular blocks cut from ancient seabeds buried beneath sand. The slabs were heavy, pale, and essential. In a humid, tropical climate, salt was not luxury, it was survival. Without salt, bodies fail. Without gold, trade networks falter. So the two commodities met in careful exchange. Gold dust, measured and weighed with precision, moved north toward markets in North Africa and beyond. Salt, textiles, books, ceramics, and horses moved south into Mali cities and villages. Picture a desert encampment at night. Camels kneel in a circle. Traders sit close together around a small fire shielded from wind. The stars above are astonishingly clear. The Milky Way spills across the sky like a river of light. Conversation is quiet. Merchants speak in Arabic, in Berber dialects, and Mande languages. Contracts are discussed. News is shared, of political shifts, of distant droughts, of new rulers. Trade was not merely economic. It was informational. It connected Mali to Cairo, to Fez, to distant Mediterranean ports. It carried stories as surely as it carried goods. And yet it was fragile. A misjudged water source could mean catastrophe. Sandstorms could disorient even experienced guides. Wells had to be known in advance, their locations guarded knowledge. Caravans traveled in seasons, timing departure to avoid the worst heat. Even so, the desert demanded endurance. Days blurred together in monotony, sand, sky, steppe, breath. Imagine yourself walking beside a camel, the rope rough in your hand. Your skin is coated in fine dust. Your water ration is measured carefully. You think often of shade, of riverbanks, of green fields far to the south. And yet, this hardship produced stability. Through these routes, Mali became one of the wealthiest states of its era. Gold reached European mints. Maps drawn in distant lands labeled the West African interior with awe and speculation. The desert, silent and vast, became a bridge rather than a barrier. And trade shaped society in return. Merchants grew influential. Islamic scholars traveled along these same routes. Architectural styles migrated. Legal traditions spread. Even ideas about governance were influenced by contact with North African states. All of this, slowly, steadily, across centuries. The Sahara did not rush. Neither did the caravans. And as wealth accumulated, it required structure. Gold and salt were not merely traded, they were taxed, regulated, protected. This brings us gently toward the systems that organized power within the Mali Empire. Because wealth must be governed. And governance in Mali was layered, deliberate, and deeply hierarchical. Now, imagine yourself not in the desert and not in the riverbed, but inside the structured world that held all of this together. Empires do not run on gold alone. They run on hierarchy. The Mali Empire was not chaotic wealth scattered across sand. It was layered, ordered, deliberate. Every person knew their place, or at least they were expected to. At the top stood the Mansa, the emperor. Beneath him were nobles, provincial governors, military commanders, and trusted advisors. Authority flowed downward like the Niger River, branching into smaller and smaller channels. Imagine yourself standing in a village courtyard at dusk. A messenger has arrived from a regional governor. His clothing is modest but well kept. He carries a staff, symbol of delegated authority. He announces new tax expectations for the coming season. No one argues. The empire required rice. It required gold. It required loyalty. And loyalty was not abstract. It was measured in tribute, in service, in attendance at court. Beneath nobles stood merchants, powerful in their own quiet way. Though not aristocrats, successful traders controlled movement of goods and information. They financed caravans. They negotiated cross-cultural contracts. They built family networks that extended far beyond village boundaries. Wealth gave them influence, but influence did not always translate into political authority. Social mobility existed, but within boundaries. Craft specialists, blacksmiths, leatherworkers, griots, often formed hereditary castes. Their roles were respected but fixed. A blacksmith's son became a blacksmith. A griot's daughter inherited songs and genealogies. Society moved in cycles. Predictable. Stable. Now we must speak gently about another layer. Enslaved labor existed within the Mali Empire, as it did across much of the medieval world. War captives, debtors, and individuals absorbed through conquest could be placed into servitude. Their lives were not uniform. Some worked in agriculture, others in households. Some eventually integrated into broader society over generations. The reality was complex and varied by region and era. What matters in this quiet reflection is that hierarchy rested on unequal foundations. Wealth at the top required labor at the base. Imagine yourself again in the gold fields. The work is repetitive, the sun relentless, the overseer silent but observant. No chains are described here, no dramatic scenes, only structure, expectation, obligation. The empire depended on order. Local chiefs governed villages but answered upward. Provincial rulers collected tribute but answered to Niani. The Mansa held ultimate authority but relied on loyalty networks that had to be maintained through generosity and diplomacy. Law was shaped by both Islamic jurisprudence and indigenous custom. Disputes were settled in councils. Oaths were sworn before witnesses. Reputation mattered deeply. The system was not chaotic. It was calibrated. And like all hierarchies, it functioned best when stability held. When drought came, tension rose. When trade slowed, tax burdens felt heavier. When leadership faltered, cracks widened. Yet for long stretches the structure endured. And within that structure there was contrast. Because while miners strained beneath the sun and traders crossed deserts, there existed another world entirely. A world of measured diplomacy. Of textiles that shimmered softly in lamplight. Of carved pillars and quiet audiences. Let us now step into that contrasting realm. Let us enter the royal court of Niani. Imagine approaching Niani, capital of the Mali Empire. The air here feels different. The dust still settles lightly on sandals, but the buildings rise with intention. Courtyards are organized. Walls are constructed from sun-baked earth, their surfaces smoothed and renewed seasonally. At the heart of the city stands the royal compound. You do not simply walk inside. Access is layered. Guards stand at entryways. Attendants manage movement. Visitors wait patiently, sometimes for days, before receiving audience. Inside, the atmosphere is deliberate. Textiles hang from wooden beams. Carved stools rest along walls. Gold, never excessive but unmistakable, adorns regalia, jewelry, ceremonial objects. The Mansa does not shout. He sits. Stillness is power. Imagine the court assembled. Nobles in fine woven cloth sit according to rank. Scholars stand respectfully to one side. Griots prepare to recite genealogies linking the ruler to legendary ancestors. Silence precedes speech. When the Mansa speaks, it is measured. Diplomacy here is quiet but precise. Envoys from distant lands present gifts. Horses, manuscripts, ceramics. In return, gold and textiles are bestowed. Every gesture is symbolic. The court is not chaotic wealth on display. It is controlled wealth. Ceremonies mark seasonal transitions. Festivals acknowledge harvest cycles. Islamic prayers blend with long-standing Mande traditions. Architecture reflects both local building techniques and broader Sahelian influences. Imagine walking across a courtyard at sunset. The air cools. Drums echo softly in the distance. A breeze carries the scent of earth and distant cooking fires. This is not the gold field. This is not the desert caravan. This is the apex of accumulated labor. And yet, even here, fragility exists. Royal authority depends on continued loyalty from provincial governors. Trade must flow. Harvests must succeed. The court's elegance rests on the stability of countless unseen workers. The contrast is striking but interconnected. Without miners, no gold. Without traders, no wealth circulation. Without structured hierarchy, no palace order. And so the court of Niani becomes the final thematic image in our journey, a place where wealth is visible but carefully contained, where power is expressed through calm composure rather than noise. The empire's strength was not loud. It was steady. And as we step back from the palace walls, we can reflect gently on what all of this means. Let us move now toward a quiet conclusion. Across this journey we have walked through heat and dust. We have stood beside miners in riverbeds, watched caravans cross the Sahara, listened to scholars debate beneath clay walls, and entered courts where gold glimmered softly in lamplight. The Mali Empire was not a single image. It was layers. Beneath the sand lay wealth. Above it lived people, laboring, praying, governing, trading. Some endured harsh sun and repetitive work. Others moved through shaded halls, draped in woven cloth. And yet all were part of the same system. Gold did not shine by itself. It was lifted, carried, exchanged, regulated. It passed through hands both weary and adorned. Perhaps what feels most distant to us now is not the heat or the hierarchy, but the rhythm. Life moved more slowly. News traveled by caravan. Authority was visible and personal. Night skies were darker. And survival required daily attention to forces we often take for granted. Weather, water, distance. As you rest now, far from river silt and desert wind, consider the quiet endurance that shaped that world. Wealth beneath sand. Humility above it. An empire built not on spectacle, but on steady motion. And with that image, the Niger flowing gently past unseen gold, we allow the past to settle. Slowly, softly. And perhaps, like the desert at night, into stillness,